Welcome back, everyone. This is Michael Sigman in the Philosophy Department at East Los Angeles College, and this video is going to wrap up what we started earlier in talking about the social contract. In this video, though, we're going to zero in on the social contract position that's developed. It's a very interesting one by the philosopher John Rawls. John Rawls is an American philosopher. Not everybody who's well known in philosophy is American. These are all, going through them very quickly, these are all ideas that we covered in the last short video. And we remember that the authors of the Declaration of Independence in the U.S., they kind of ripped off John Locke. Okay, so here we go with Rawls and his idea of the original position. Rawls is, full disclosure, Rawls had a very big impact on me in my academic career as I went forward in my master's degree and my doctoral program. I went to a number of conferences and watched John Rawls while he was still alive, and I actually met the man. He died about 16 years ago now. This is 2018. And he died in 2002. Anyways, Rawls revitalized the idea of social contract theory because it had sort of fallen out of favor. People started to take for granted the work of some of those other social contract theorists, like Locke, like Hobbes, and like Rousseau, and they sort of relied on the idea that those social contract guys, they've figured out what it means to start talking about justice, and so we don't need to go back and really address this whole state of nature kind of thing. Well, Rawls reinvigorated that tradition, and he did so by introducing, really most famously, a book that he wrote called A Theory of Justice. Now, our reading selection comes from the sequel to A Theory of Justice. And as you see in your textbook, it's called Political Liberalism. And so in political liberalism, what Rawls is doing is he is addressing some of the sort of loose ends, you might say, that critics of his pointed out in his first work, A Theory of Justice. But A Theory of Justice was really a work that really energized a lot of people in the world of philosophy. Okay. Rawls's aim is to help us understand the idea of justice in a fair way, that is, in a non-biased way. And he has a particular term that he uses for his approach to talking about justice, and he calls it justice as fairness. He calls it justice as fairness. So what is unique about Rawls's approach from the outset is that he's going to, in a sense, force us to be fair. And in forcing us to be fair, it creates a sort of a new idea of justice that many people had never thought of before. What he begins with is he recognizes from the outset that we have a natural bias. Human beings are just naturally biased towards our own self-interest. And what happens to be in your self-interest is dependent upon some of the circumstances in your life. That is, if you are born male, for example, then what's in your self-interest would be something like a patriarchy, where we have society where men are in positions of control, and men set the standards for what everyone else can do. Okay, if you were a female, that would not be in your best interest, correct? And as such, then, what the male sees as a just political order, the female would see as not being one. So these particulars of our life circumstances, they sort of automatically warp our views of what it means, to have fair treatment. What Rawls is cleverly going to do is he's going to rechannel that bias that we have, our bias towards self-interest, and he's going to rechannel it into a way in which we see the bigger picture. It's not just about ourselves, it's about the whole of society and the kind of society that we would want to live in. So there is still some element of self-interest, but as you'll see, it gets our normal notion of self-interest gets undermined in a very massive way. So here's an example, right? If I'm gender G, I'm race X, I subscribe to religion Y, and I have, say, blue eyes, then my normal understanding would be that what justice demands, what's fair, is whatever is in the best interest of a person just like me, with attributes G, X, Y, and B. And you might think that the last edition, having blue eyes, is really very trivial. But it's actually not. I don't know how many of you have seen the documentary that was done. There was a social experiment done on school kids. And this was a very long time ago. It was in the 1960s or something. I apologize for not having the reference. But they did a psychological experiment on these little kids, these kids that were like 7 years old. And what they did was they convinced all of these kids that your eye color determined whether you were a good person or not. And the kids bought it. And so the kids started treating the other kids based on their eye colors. So even something as trivial as eye color can be a standard that we use for what some person deserves. That is, how we should treat them and what we owe them or what they owe us. Rawls, in other words, never pretends that we are saints or that we see the world completely objectively with no bias. He never says that, even from the beginning of his work. But what if your life particulars were different? As I indicated earlier, that would modify, right, your notion of what's fair. If your gender was different, if you were a different race, if you subscribe to a different metaphysical and religious view than as above religion Y, if you subscribe to something different, then you're going to have a different conception of how society should be treating you. And again, what if you had green eyes instead of blue eyes? Under those alternative life conditions, then, we would argue that justice demands something different, depending on what's to the advantage of my new life particulars, or my new characteristics. This is where Rawls is really starting to introduce to us, in sort of a subtle way right now, what he calls a natural lottery. Now, this is something that I talked about in one of our earlier videos, in fact, the opening video for this unit on social and political philosophy, when I talked about egalitarians, because Rawls is a prime case of someone who's an egalitarian. Remember, égal is just French. It means equal. So an egalitarian is someone who believes in equality for everyone, treating everyone as equals. Excuse me. What Rawls is going to argue then is that the particulars of your life, what gender you're born, what race you're born into, what level of wealth you're born into, what your geographical location is that you're born into, all these sort of things that were just thrust upon you when you were a baby. That all that stuff is, if you think about it, kind of luck. It's like what he calls a natural lottery. And some people are winners in the natural lottery. You know, they're born and, oh, look at this, I live in a mansion and I'm spectacularly beautiful and I'm really smart and strong and emotionally stable, and so life is good. But that's not how everyone's born, right? Some people are born in the slums of Calcutta. And I mean, I've been to India. And when they talk about slums there, I mean, pardon me, families live basically at trash heaps. That's where they live. The kids run around naked because they actually don't have any clothes unless they can find something. And then they're actually want to sell those clothes more than wear them because that way they can buy some food. Just very, very cheap stuff. So you don't want to open your eyes when you're a baby and say, oh no, the slums of Calcutta, this sucks. To lose our bias, then, Rawls is going to create a hypothetical scenario, a scenario called the original position. It is not supposed to be historical. It's just supposed to be a thought experiment that can put us in the right frame of mind to see what is truly fair. What is, in other words, really treating everyone as being equal to ourselves. For Rawls, that original position is the vantage point of justice. It is from the original position that we are able to see really a pure understanding of what, or at least a purer understanding of what justice entails. And for Rawls, it really is just a matter of us gaining the proper perspective and, in a sense, losing our biases. Well, how do I put myself in the original position to to think about justice? Again, Rawls' aim is to understand what justice really means and what a just society would really be like. He wants us to be able to conceive of these things. So, the original position is this very odd set of circumstances. But what he's doing, what his method is here, is that he is artificially, and hypothetically, but he's artificially manufacturing fair starting conditions to begin with. He is, in other words, forcing us into a position of equality so that we then can think about others as sharing the same interest as we have. And that's, for Rawls, what fairness is all about. The original position, and we're going to dive into this a little bit more, the original position invokes this thing that he calls the veil of ignorance. So you are, in a sense, blindfolded from your life and from the life particulars that you have, right? And you are able to discuss and debate with others how society really should operate. Again, justice as fairness is his unique spin on the idea of justice. And we can only get into that original position by drawing down the veil of ignorance. And the word veil there, right, is like a bridal veil. So it's a way of blocking one's vision. And of course, these people are blindfolded. Did you know that a very popular activity in Paris, France, is a blindfolded dinner? Not kidding. You pay money, and they take you in and they give you some wines and so forth. And but first they sit you down at the table and they blindfold you, and then they're going to serve you whatever they're going to serve you. And so you can't see it to say, oh, that looks disgusting, or no way am I going to try something like that. You just eat it, and it takes away your sort of your other senses biases, and makes you think about how the food actually tastes. So you might wind up finding out that you really enjoy sea urchin or something like that, which you would have never tried in a million years if just left to your own judgment. Okay. Anyways, forget about the Parisians and their obsession with food. The veil of ignorance. In this hypothetical scenario, you are plucked out of your life. You are taken out of your life that you're living right now. And you're sent off to this nondescript waiting room. This waiting room, you don't know where you're at. It's just a very blank waiting room, and you're blindfolded there. But you have your peers to talk with. But what you're told behind the veil of ignorance is that your old life is finished. You are going to be assigned a brand new life. Your new life, though, is going to be based on the outcome of a giant and absolutely random lottery. So you don't know what the particulars of your life are going to turn out to be. Before the results of the lottery are revealed, though, you and the others in the room are given the opportunity to discuss and debate about what the principles that we're going to base society on. Now, we're not talking about figuring out every single law that goes on in society, but we want to establish some boundaries. We want to establish some hard and fast rules that our society must abide by after we find out what the results of the natural lottery are. So, in that kind of condition, you are making a decision for yourself that is for really for all the marbles. Because whatever you agree on in that room before the results of the lottery are drawn, that's going to determine how your new society treats you, and how your new society, or sort of what it has to offer you for, again, the rest of your days. So, the veil of ignorance really is a set of restrictions on what you can know about yourself. It's a set of restrictions on what you can know about yourself, and it's a long list. So here we go. Behind the veil of ignorance, you cannot know your age. So you don't know, once the veil is lifted and you see your lottery ticket, you don't know if you're going to be 12 years old, or 35 years old, or 95 years old. You don't know. You don't know what your level of wealth is going to be. You don't know if you're going to be fabulously and opulently wealthy, or absolutely destitute and impoverished. You don't know. You don't know what race you're going to be. You don't know what ethnicity you will be. You don't know what your social status is going to be. And yes, for the Americans listening, I know we already mentioned level of wealth, but social status is something different. Americans tend to conflate those two ideas. You don't know what gender you are. So you don't know if you're male or female. You don't know that yet. This lottery is going to change potentially a whole bunch of things about your reality and what's in your best interest. You cannot even know your physical strength. You don't know if you are born with a strong, healthy body, or if you are going to be plagued with health problems. You don't know your mental abilities. That is, you don't know if in your new life you are going to be just amazingly brilliant, or if you're going to be a complete dullard. You don't know. You also don't know what your emotional disposition is. So you don't know if you're someone who is prone to sort of hysterical reactions, someone whose emotions really control their behavior more than it should, or if you are more of a stable and stoic individual who can kind of roll with the punches in life. You also don't know your motivational level. So you don't know, in other words, if you are one of those people who just says, I see my goals, I'm going to pick myself up by my bootstraps, as that cliche goes. I'm going to attack the world and go get my goals. Maybe that's you, but maybe it's not. Maybe you're someone who is very passive, who just sort of wants to go with the flow. And so here you might think of, for example, the infamous distinction between what we call today type A personalities and type B personalities. You do not know your physical appearance. You don't know if you are, again, fantastically beautiful, just jaw-droppingly gorgeous. Maybe that's going to be your result. But maybe you're going to be hideously ugly. You don't know. You don't know your historical era. So you don't know if you're going to be born in the 21st century. I mean, reborn and placed into your new life in the 21st century. Maybe it's going to be the 18th century. You don't know your geographical location. Maybe your new life is going to take place starting out in Los Angeles, but maybe it's going to start out taking place in Siberia. And finally, you do not know your cultural inheritance or your cultural traditions. So you don't know what the values that members of your group would fall back on. Look at that list. I mean, if you don't know these things about yourself, what do you really know? Well, you know a couple of things. And here, Rawls talks about this in much more detail in his first book, A Theory of Justice, where he says, for example, we know basic economic theory. We understand the notion of self-interest. So we can still keep some of our knowledge, but that knowledge cannot bear directly on our new identity, our new life particulars. Why is it important to put this veil down and make sure that people don't know any of those factors about their new life? Well, let's say that you peeked. You peeked around, you took a little peek around the veil of ignorance, and you saw that you were going to be a female. That's the only fact that you saw. Well, in those deliberations that you're having with the others in the room to try to set down the basic rules for society, not every single law, but these are the guidelines that we want society to follow. You would argue vehemently. You would argue with all of your strength, all of your might, that females should be guaranteed positions of power. That maybe females should be the ones running governments, or that females should be the only corporate titans, or that females became the breadwinners and got to tell the males what their value was. So, if you peek around the veil of ignorance, you're going to start uh, making justice, again, biased to your particular life details. If you, I mean, and it's true for any of these factors. Maybe think about physical appearance. If you peeked around the veil of ignorance and the only fact you saw about your new life was that you were going to be really gorgeous, then you would lobby very hard in those discussions for the basic rules of society. You would lobby very hard for something like a beautocracy. That is, a government where the beautiful are the ones who are given preference for hiring, for positions of power. The beautiful run the world. Not that far removed, I suspect, from contemporary American society as well. All of these factors, all of them, age, level of wealth, race, so forth, all the way going through historical era, geographical location, cultural traditions, and inheritance, all of those factors are again going to be randomly assigned to not just you, but everybody in the room. And you cannot know in advance what your lottery ticket is going to say. You don't know what your life particulars are going to be after the results are revealed. You have to make your rules for society now, behind the veil of ignorance. This is, for Rawls, the original position. So he's in a very crafty way, forcing us, yeah, to treat others as equals, because the lottery is random, and so we could wind up in anybody's position in society. So we're really going to want to make sure that our society takes care of us, no matter where we wind up in the lottery. So, what kinds of rules do you think that everyone in the room would agree on? What kind of rules would they agree on? Here's a suggestion. Maybe there's a theory called utilitarianism, and it is most commonly projected as an ethical theory. But some people take it and apply it to other areas, although maybe it's not legitimately. Anyways, utilitarianism, and we talked about this when we talked about John Stuart Mill, do you remember? Utilitarianism always follows the rule of the greatest good for the greatest number. It says that our obligation in every instance is to create the greatest good, the greatest amount of happiness in the world for the greatest number of people. Would we choose utilitarianism as a guiding principle? And Rawls suggests, maybe that will come up in the discussions, but ultimately, the group and you also are going to say no. Let's avoid utilitarianism, because remember, in utilitarianism, the minority, or even lone individuals, can be repressed and abused for the enjoyment of the majority. So think of, as an example, something like slave society, right? Something we talked about or we saw with Karl Marx. In a slave society, if the production multiplies immensely, and the goods that are being created by the slaves are sent off to people in all these different countries, and these are luxury goods, and everyone loves them, then utilitarianism might say that this is actually not just a good strategy, but that it is the morally correct thing to do. So Rawls says, no way. We want to avoid that because there's a likelihood that we could wind up not in the majority. Would we agree, as I suggested when we peek around the veil of ignorance, would we agree that females should be in charge of all the positions of power in society? Well, no, because we might not get a ticket in the lottery that says you're female. We might get a male ticket, or we might get an intersex ticket. So again, too risky. In the end, what we're going to want to ensure is that society, the society that we set the rules for now, that society treats everyone reasonably well. Because if there are any bad tickets in the lottery, we might be unfortunate enough to draw one of them and wind up living a miserable life. So notice how equality is creeping in here. I mean, Rawls is very clever in how he's putting us in this predicament. After all of our discussions, what John Rawls argues is that the group would, in every case, the group would settle on two rules. Two rules that are the guiding principles for whatever society we wind up in afterward. These rules cannot be violated, and we can make different laws and we can make different changes in society, but any of those modifications that we make to society in the future have to respect these two principles, because these are what justice is all about. The first is what Rawls calls the principle of liberty. And Rawls scholars will sometimes call it the freedom principle. It means the same thing, right? Liberty means freedom. And in your textbook, you find this in the section, it's in section 1, and the title of that section is Addressing Two Fundamental Questions. And as you get toward the bottom of the second column, Rawls points out that there are two principles of justice, and they are as follows. And so we have an A and a B. A, that you see in your reading, is the principle of liberty. It says each person has an equal claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic rights and liberties, which scheme is compatible with the same scheme for all. And in this scheme, the equal political liberties, and only those liberties, are to be guaranteed their fair value. Okay, kind of sounds like a little legalistic there. What he's saying, and I'll cut to the chase, what he's saying is every individual should be as free as possible, as long as the manifestation of their freedom does not interfere with the freedom of somebody else. So you can be as free as you want as long as your freedom is not interfering with somebody else's freedom. That's the principle of liberty. And we've seen this idea before. And we're going to see where, maybe it rings a bell to you, but we're going to see where in just a second. The second principle of justice is known as the difference principle. It's known as the difference principle. And in your book, it is the very next article. It's labeled B in section 1 again. And I'll simply read it aloud. Social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. First, they are to be attached to positions and offices open to all, under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. And second, they are to be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. So he's putting down really two conditions here in his difference principle. One is that we have to give everybody an opportunity to advance in society or to hold important positions in our society. We cannot, just because of their lottery results, lock anybody out. Secondly, and this is something that really his critics don't like. Secondly, he maintains that the only changes that we can really make to a society they must be to the benefit of the least advantaged members of our society. Now, if the change benefits everyone, no problem. No problem at all. But what he says we cannot allow are changes in our laws, changes in our social institutions, which benefit the people who already, by just good luck, got great lottery tickets without simultaneously benefiting people who just got bad tickets. So it's unfair. Again, justice as fairness. It's unfair to start giving advantages to people who are already advantaged just from having luck in life. And really, what you absolutely must avoid is setting up rules in this new society where the people who were most advantaged from the life lottery, we cannot have a new policy that increases or benefits them, increases their well-being, while simultaneously punishing or penalizing or making life worse for those who already got bad tickets in the lottery. You would never agree to that kind of change. I mean, you would say, look, if I get a bad ticket, don't push me further down. Just no way. If I get a bad ticket, then that's that's on me. But you absolutely would draw the line and say, no, you can't make it even worse. You can't exacerbate the problem. Rawls talks about these principles being lexically ordered, and what that means is they are is that they're sequential. In other words, number one always has to be respected first. It's our top priority. And then once it's satisfied, then we kick in with principle two, the difference principle. In reviewing Rawls's really kind of odd, right? Original position, this hypothetical thought experiment, almost nobody disagrees with Rawls on his first principle, that principle of liberty. Because if you read it again, what it's actually doing is it is promoting what we have previously called negative rights. With John Stuart Mill, we saw that he was a big fan of negative rights. And there are other contractarians who really advanced the notion that negative rights were critical, including John Locke, who he talked about these rights that must be protected. And the the founders, the authors of the Declaration of Independence in the U.S., they called it unalienable rights, which is to say they're non-negotiable. These things have to be protected. The second principle, however, is open to attack. It has been attacked from many different ways. Two of the more famous attacks came, one from a guy named Michael Sandel, and the second was from a guy named Robert Nozick. And they both just were not happy with Rawls's conception of justice, and they attacked him in very different ways. But let's stick to Rawls and see what his case is. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to run you through an example, and this hypothetical case, this imaginary case, is going to help you to understand what Rawls is talking about when he is insisting on this difference principle as one of the principles of justice. That is, any just society has got to follow that standard. All right. So let's imagine that whole big life lottery with all those various details about your life. Let's imagine that that we reduced it all down, we compact it all down to just 3 classes. So in the life lottery, in that natural lottery, which you cannot control, you can get a Class A ticket, or you can get a Class B ticket, or you can get a Class C ticket. Obviously, it's quite an oversimplification, but this helps us understand what he's doing. So you can get an A ticket, a B ticket, or a C ticket. You have an equal chance of getting any one of those tickets. And again, you cannot control which class you're going to be in. What you can control, however, and what you are ultimately debating in the original position with other people is what kind of society we want to live in. So let's set the rules for society before we find out if we're going to be Class A, Class B, or Class C. Because some people are going to be A's, some will be B's, and some will be C's, right? Well, our three competing societies here, what they do is they divide up social goods in different ways. And Rawls has a rather generic way of referring to these things that we desire in society, like money, like social status, um, like access to important jobs, to good jobs, access to education, all that kind of stuff. He kind of follows the model of economics. And I don't know if you've ever studied economics, but famously, economics talks about widgets. There's no such thing as a widget. A widget is just a hypothetical product, right? Okay, well, Rawls is kind of doing the same thing. And just to note, he has a very deep background in statistics as well. Excuse me. So what Rawls's terminology is units of social value. So these competing societies, we're going to start out with the same number of units of social value, but these societies are actually going to divide them up differently. In Society 1, if you get an A ticket in the life lottery, then you're going to receive 75 units of social value. And these are things that we desire. If you get a B ticket in the lottery, you are going to get a big drop. You're going to get 20 units of social value in society number 1. And in society number 1, if you get a C ticket, you're only going to get 5 units of social value. All right. Society 2 divides things up differently. If you get an A ticket in society number 2, you're going to get 50 units of social value. If you get a B ticket, you're going to be given 30 units of social value. And if you get a C ticket, you're going to get 20 units of social value. Okay? Now, society number 3, again, has a different distribution. If you get an A ticket, you are going to get 90 units of social value. But if you get a B ticket, you're only going to get 9. And heaven forbid that you should get a C ticket in society number 3, because you get only 1 unit of social value. Notice how the total number of units of social value for each society adds up to 100. Okay, so they are just dividing up or distributing among the classes in different ways in these different societies. Remember, you cannot control whether you end up in Class A, Class B, or Class C. But you can control which society you're going to be a member of. And you are choosing this before you know if you're Class A, Class B, or Class C. And you're choosing it for the remainder of your life. So this is not a temporary condition. You choose a society, and the rest of your life is going to be based on what you choose here in this critical original position. So your welfare really is up for grabs. Okay, so here's the trick. You can only choose one. You can only choose society number 1, society number 2, or society number 3. So, what is your choice? And I'm asking you individually, what is your choice? Society 1, Society 2, or Society number 3? Which one would you say, I want to be a member of that society, even before you knew what your natural lottery ticket would say? I'll give you a moment to look at the options here. What is your choice? Okay, well, what did you choose? Rawls predicted that if you are rational, you chose society number 2. Is that what you chose? I suspect that many of you did. So Rawls has Rawls actually has some predictive power with this original position. Uh, Almost nobody goes for society number 1. If you're going for society number 1, in some way you're just you're not really playing it safe, but you are not going for it all. So it's just kind of a tepid, a lukewarm, just a half committed decision. If you choose society number 3, you are a gambler because you are betting like crazy that you get that A ticket. Because if you don't get the A ticket, your life is going to be terrible. You are rolling dice and hoping for something that's out of your control. I mean, you might hit, but the odds are that you won't. Because remember, you have an equal chance of coming in Class A, Class B, or Class C. In other words, you have a 67% chance of not getting Class A and having a horrible life. People who choose society number 3, again, they're gamblers. But Rawls's argument is gamblers are not rational. Gamblers go against reason, and that's part of the thrill. So, when Rawls calls us rational for choosing society number 2, what is he really saying? His idea of rationality is quite unique, and it derives from his work as a professional statistician. He combined political theory with statistical empirical evidence. And even today, that many people in not political science, because that's a completely different field, but people in political theory and social theory will crunch the numbers and see what the trends say for example, different approaches to sharing in society. And there are many different models on what's known as game theory. Following this Bayesian model, which means, in other words, there's some uncertainty involved. And that's precisely what's going on here. Rationality under conditions of uncertainty, like we just faced, I mean, we didn't know if we were going to be A, B, or C class. Under conditions of uncertainty like that, Rawls's model of rationality is what we would call maxi-min rationality. Maxi-min rationality. That is, the most rational choice to make under these conditions of uncertainty is the one that leaves you with the best outcome, even if everything goes wrong. So even if you got the C ticket, you're still okay. So if we flash back just a second here, really for Rawls, all you had to do was look here at Class C. And you compare those societies with that bottom rung. Society number 1 only gave you 5, society number 2 gave you 20, and society number 3 gave you a pittance, gave you 1. And so we focus right there and we say 20, that's what I'm doing. So, maximum rationality advises us to plan accordingly, do our best, make the best choice for the worst case scenario. It's, of course, the opposite of what gamblers do. You are, in other words, you're maximizing your minimum outcome. You're maximizing your minimum outcome. And that's where the word comes from, maxi min. Maximize your minimum outcome. Well, why did we look at those crazy hypothetical societies, and why are we talking about being playing it close to the vest, as we say, or being very cautious? Well, it's because if you look closely, Rawls' second principle of justice, that difference principle, the one that not everybody likes, it's actually derived by using maxi min rationality. And I invite you to go back and read what it says. Because what it's really preparing us for is worst case scenario. It says, okay, look, if I get a bad ticket, or if anybody gets a bad ticket, we still got to make sure that they have a good quality of life. Because, hey, you might be the one who gets the bad ticket. And Rawls will go further and maintain that, freedom is great. And, of course, he gives number one priority to his principle of liberty. Freedom's great, but what good is freedom if you never have the opportunity to be in a position of respect, or a position of power, or a position of influence in your society? Or what if you're free, but society starts changing laws that makes losers in the life lottery, those who just got bad tickets, makes their lives worse off than they even started out, while simultaneously rewarding the people who already got lucky? Again, I'm free, but what good is it? I mean, I can't I can't achieve my goals in life, and the rules are changing such that my life is getting worse and worse and worse. How would you possibly agree to that if you were in the original position? Remember, you could get that bad ticket. And so since it's a real possibility for you, you're going to hedge your bet. You're going to play things a little cautiously. And that's fair, because you would expect others to provide you with, a tolerable standard of living if you got a bad ticket. So you have to treat them in the same way. So that's why it becomes a principle. It's a principle of the whole society. Because Rawls, he maintains that there are just going to be inequalities in the world all the time. People aren't born with the same IQ. People aren't born with the same level of beauty. I mean, not yet, at least. Who knows in the future with cloning and so forth? Who knows? If you've never read, by the way, Aldous Huxley's book called Brave New World, give it a look when you get a chance. There are going to be inequalities in the world. The question is, what's a fair way to handle those differences? Again, justice as fairness. In the original position, you are forced to be fair because you don't know whether those inequalities in society are going to be to your benefit or they're going to work against you. So we want to handle inequalities as a matter of principle in a conservative manner. That is, we want to treat it cautiously. For Rawls, it turns out that the ultimate standard of measure is the most disadvantaged individuals in a society. So if you want to see how just a society is, how much it is capturing and fulfilling the promise of justice, look at how that society treats its most disadvantaged individuals. it is, again, truly unjust to start modifying the laws and institutions in society such that they work to the advantage of the most advantaged in the natural lottery and work against the least advantaged, those who, through no fault of their own, just drew a bad ticket in the life lottery. That life lottery, again, remember, Rawls is calling, and egalitarians call, a natural lottery. That's sort of, from our perspective, that's how nature plays out, right? You're born and you didn't earn to have blue eyes. You didn't earn to be as tall as you are. You didn't earn to be your particular race or ethnicity. You didn't earn your gender. It just happened. And so Rawls's expression for this is, you know, all those factors of our life, they're absolutely arbitrary from a moral point of view. They are, in other words, random. And to base a society on winners and losers in something that's out of our control, nobody would agree to that. That's absurd. We can use reason and do better. So all changes that get made to our society after everyone has gotten their lottery tickets and society's functioning and we have our two rules, all the changes that are allowed to be made in the future must be to the advantage of the least advantaged. Again, if the change benefits everybody, no problem. But if the change only benefits, for example, the wealthy, like changing tax codes or something, and it does not help those who are in the lower tax brackets, absolutely not. Not allowed. Because you, not knowing which category you're going to be in, would never agree to an arrangement like that. You would see it as being absolutely irrational because there's a real risk that you could wind up in a position where you start out with a bad life and people start changing it so that they're getting better and you're just stuck. Again, all changes that we make in society, that is, all new policies that we make, all new laws that we introduce, all new social institutions that we support, they must be to the advantage of the least advantaged. We would demand this rule in the original position. That's Rawls's argument. Now that we understand justice from a purer perspective, that is, we have deliberated and put ourselves in the original position and we've recognized the two principles of justice, now we actually have the ability to sort of bounce back and forth between that hypothetical thought experiment and then back into our actual lives in real societies, like contemporary American society or contemporary Norwegian society or contemporary society in Ivory Coast or in Uruguay. We can, in other words, we have a criteria for measuring how well that society is doing in terms of fulfilling the possibility of justice. And so you can actually compare societies, one society to another, and say, and you can say quite objectively, that this society is more just than that society because they are living up to our two principles of justice better. So look around and look at different countries and see how they treat their poor. I mean, how they treat their incapacitated, how they treat invalids, how they treat people with mental handicaps. The U.S., we have programs in place. We have both some public programs that are in place, and we also have some private institutions that are in place. You know, things like St. Vincent de Paul's or the City of Hope. We do have some both public and private institutions that are in place, and some laws. Um, like for example, the WIC program that helps mothers make sure that they can feed their kids if they're in a condition of poverty. We do have some safety net in place for those people who just got bad tickets in the lottery. In the U.S., we do. Could we do better? Absolutely. I mean, there are other societies that are doing much better than the U.S. is doing. Uh, are there societies that are doing worse than the U.S.? Absolutely. I mean, there is no safety net in a place like India or Sri Lanka or Indonesia. In Indonesia, the saying is you work or you die, because there is no social security, there is no unemployment assurance. You have to work, or else that's it. You're not going to get any help. This bouncing back and forth process and looking at real societies and measuring whether they are doing what we would demand of them as just societies. If they are, in other words, really, really performing the types of actions and policies, if they're in place, that we would demand ourselves individually in that original position. And Rawls calls this bouncing back and forth. He calls it reflexive equilibrium. So we can reflect on what it means to be just in a very pure sense, and we can reflect on how our actual society is doing in measuring up to those standards. And the goal really is to try to bring them into an equilibrium, not have just the original position has these great principles, and then our real society doesn't participate in them or doesn't respect them at all. So you have a real standard, in other words, to understand justice and to advocate change in real life. And you know, using the original position, that what you're doing is in advocating these changes, what you're doing is rational, and it also serves the cause of justice. Okay, so that wraps up John Rawls for us. And I hope that you can see how Rawls is a social contractarian, right? What he's saying really is that we would demand these two conditions in our contract with any government. But we also have seen in our reading selection here in Unit 3, we've also seen an example of another person who's treated as a social contractarian a lot, and that is the work called the Crito, where Socrates, remember, he is saying that yes, it's really messed up that these guys are trying to that they've thrown me in jail, and they're trying to uh, use me as a scapegoat for something that was not my fault. You know, that's not good, but I have lived here all my life and I've benefited from that. So I have to abide by my side of the contract and live by the laws as they are enforced. If I didn't like the laws of Athens, I could have left. I could have gone somewhere else, lived in a different society. But because I stayed here, and because I benefited from Athenian organization, society, and laws, and there's his conversation with the laws that we see, because of that, it's my duty. It's my duty to now live up to my side of the contract. That is, to let society determine my punishment. So, in that sense, uh, Socrates is really advancing more of a position of paternalism. I'm sorry you have to sit here and look at the me and the elephant here so long. I apologize, I didn't have another slide here. I thought I did. um, you you can see that Plato is advocating something called paternalism, and paternalism is an analogy. And we know what analogies are. They're comparisons. And you used to do these in school, I guarantee you, where it would say, for example, a kitten is to cat as puppy is to blank. And of course, what would you fill in there? You would say dog, right? So what it's saying is the relationship that obtains here also obtains in this other case. Paternalism is the idea that the relationship between the parent and the child is the model of the relationship between the state and the citizen. So just as parents have the ultimate authority, they get to set the rules and they get to enforce the penalties for violations of those rules. The same conditions apply with regard to the state and us as citizens. The state has the ultimate authority. The state gets to set the rules that we have to live by, and the state has to has the authority to punish us and to determine what's a fair punishment based on those violations. Good. So this is called paternalism. Socrates' commitment to his contract with the state of Athens was pretty extreme, right? He was willing to die for it, and he lived he met a martyr's end. But he operated according to that model of paternalism because the parent is doing what they're doing for the good of the child. And so the same analogy applies here, that the state is doing what it's doing, including punishment, for the good of its citizens. Okay. Some people are open to the possibility, and I hate to say some people say because that sounds like phony news, like Fox News. But there are interpretations that I've seen uh, of Martin Luther King and his letter from Birmingham jail as being an expression of social contract. So there's a case that could be made there. I mean, you can make the case that that King is a social contractarian, that he's referring to an agreement that we have to live up to, but the state also has to live up to. We can see that idea at play with Plato and his story about Socrates, an actual story about what he saw Socrates do. But you might think about Marx or Mill. I mean, are these guys saying, look, I'm not going to sign your contract unless X, Y, and Z is the case? So social contract theory has a broad range of application. And, it's just a matter of interpreting and defending that interpretation. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I apologize that it took so long. I did not foresee in a million years as the state storage site said, the catastrophic hardware failure of our host site, and that's why I'm forcing you to go to YouTube. Thankfully, I don't have any dirty pictures or anything up there, so and nothing bad. So we're developing a workaround. In the last few days of the class, again, utilize the discussion board if you're unclear on anything. And remember, we have a discussion board with mandatory assignments, but you can also post on the discussion board for any other topic. You can say, hey, does anybody know what the heck is going on with Marx and this idea of the relations of production or something like that? discussion board is a good place to get feedback. All right, my friends, I hope you enjoyed the video and you learned a little bit from it. And good luck in completing the class here in the last few days.